Dalgok, Wadis, Jacko, Wachabalakich. This means it is good you have come to the land of the Wachabalak. Welcome to our land, and this is where my ancestors have been, and we hope you enjoy our country. Thank you. Our people have lived in this area for a long time. We used to camp along the river and near the edges of swamps and lakes. These places were especially important to our mob because food and tucker was easy to find. You can still see some places where trees were cut for canoes and shields. You can also see places where our ancestors ground Edenhope and prepared their tucker. When the early settlers arrived in the Wimmera, they asked our old people about the weather, and this is what they said. Sometimes long time wet, sometimes long time dry, and it is still the same today.
Back in the era when they used canoes and there wasn't much transport around, they first off had to get the canoes to be made out of gum trees or other sorts of trees which were lying along a river or a bit away from rivers around swamps and everything like that. The only time they could ever get them, the bark free from the trees, was when the sap was running. So they'd actually cut into the tree the shape of the canoe they wanted, then they'd start prising it out to the shape that they've cut out. And then all of a sudden it'll just pop off the tree, and then they'll tie the ends up, so while it's still green, tie the ends up and put all little barbs in between it, or stakes sort of thing to keep it apart so it wouldn't roll up on them. And tied the ends up with kangaroo sinews, I think. Then they'd put it over a fire to harden it so that it wouldn't spring any leaks or anything like that. They used it as a mode of transport along rivers and creeks and across swamps, just to move. When the wet season was here and it was very hard to walk on the dirt, they'd probably use canoes to move along, move whole families and that. Then if they had enough canoes together, they could make a shelter out of it to protect themselves from the rain and everything like that.
Major Mitchell, when he climbed up Mount Arapiles, he said that he could see 27 waterholes, lakes, swamps. It must have been a pretty wet year. You read his story, you know, his bullocks were getting bogged and his carts were getting bogged.
The sun was just rising over the bracken fern bank on the east side of the lake, and shining through a mist which hung over the surface of the water with a lovely subdued radiance, produced a picture never to be forgotten by me. To add to the entrancing loveliness of the scene, there was an almost continuous margin of flags, or bulrushes, about 8 or 9 feet high around the margin of the lake, out of which came a delightful harmony from numbers of small birds who had made their homes in the rushes. As the sun rose higher, the curtain of mist lifted, and I beheld another picture of beauty. The calm and pleasant bosom of the lake, with its hundreds of wild fowl of every sort, such as the majestic black swan, duck of different sorts, a great variety of coots and divers, etc., was a sight that made a deep impression in my boyish mind.
At the end of the 1800s, I think it's very similar, or a bit drier than what the spell is we're going through now. It's about the same period, I think, about 10, 12 years, something like that. So it's very similar in period of years. But I think that one back in the 1800s was probably a bit drier, so it's happened before.
These fences appeared out of the water, above the water line. See, so we still didn't know when they would have been dry enough ever to put a fence line through them. You know, back as far back as no one can remember. That's why we were testing the posts and trying to find out when the area was dry enough for them to fence through, go straight through these swamps, which we've seldom seen dry in our lifetime.
Oh no, my grandfather, he never spoke about that fence.
No.
He put it there, was every
And he was very astute till he was 97, so
yeah.
you know, he was around for a fair while. So Tom probably came up with the first idea of these posts, that down in his swamp, the Correa, he got a couple of the posts and they were pointed on the bottom. So we worked out they'd been driven in, and it needn't necessarily have been dry, you see. They drove them in while it was still wet, when they still had water there. But then we came up to the next swamp this way, which is Bricky, and I pulled some posts out of there, and they were all flat bottom posts, so they'd been dug, the post hole had been dug, and the post had been dropped in, and so it had been dry. Yeah, you remember this. Far told me that when they took the horses up there to either do some ploughing or something, and they got bogged, you remember what he did?
Oh, look, it's only come back a bit.
No, well, they tied their legs up, their front legs, they doubled them over, and I don't know what they did, whether they must have tied the back legs up too, and they rolled the horses out back down to the road. Because every time they'd get rails under them and lift them up, and they'd just bog down again, and they couldn't move, so they rolled them down to the road. Like it was such terrible, like there was no root mass in the soil or anything, it was just so boggy and sloppy.
March 15th, 1903. My dear Uncle, I promised to write shortly again, so if you receive my note informing you of Uncle's death, you'll be looking for this. He was buried on Tuesday, 3rd of March, and everything was done respectably. A nice black coffin. Do you think you'll pay another visit to Melbourne? We often wonder if you escaped the drought. I don't suppose it was possible, but surely it is over now. What will become of the country if there is another bad season? We are all in health. You would not know the children now.
Came January, about probably the first week of January, and in those days pictures were the big thing in town. If you could go to pictures every Saturday night, and we're in front of the mechanics hall here, and as we're waiting to go in, everybody was there half an hour before to get the best seats, and it started to rain, and it started to pelt down. We're all pushing in to get under that bit of shelter at the front, and one fella walked up, and he used to stutter, a fella, Bill Kelter here. And he said, you know, it's a bloody break. It's a bloody break, it is. In January. Ken Donaldson was there. He'd only come from... Strathalbyn over here about 12 months before, and he thought, oh, what have I come to, you know. And he said to this Bill, hang on, Bill, hang on, it's only January. And Bill Keller said, I'll tell you, it's a bloody break. Well, look, it was still pouring when we came out that night, and it had 6 inches. Oh. Yep. And then another 5 inches in February, and another 5 or 6 in March, and we had clover that high by April.
You notice 2 or 3 big trees just the other side of the fence there? Well, when we had swimming, we had learned a swim campaign there in my day. In 1938 and 39, and probably went after that too, I suppose. We would change in these big hollow trees. That was our change rooms, in these big hollow trees. That's right.
Yeah, in the 50s and 60s, it was a very great place of a carnival was held here on Foundation Day, and it was races were keenly contested here by all types, and all the young ones and the older ones and all sorts, and swimming was in it. And in latter years, when the motorboats came to work, there was a great lot of motorboating went on here too. Ski club up the top end there. On the north end, there's a ski club. Had an area there that they used to do ski across there, and it was a very popular place. It's hard to believe to see a thing this depth here to be filled overnight. But if you saw the water, the inlets that came into it during those times, wouldn't surprise you at all. Everywhere, for all directions it fed into north, south, east, and came in from the west into this area.
One of the pastimes, and this is going back about, 50 odd years. He used to go swan egging, and he had this old draft horse who had some bad habits, and he went out on his horse out to the swan's nest, and he had to get off the horse onto the swan's nest to get the eggs. But in that moment, the horse left him and went home as the swan's nest slowly sank with Adrian on it. Somebody told me that Mrs. Dishan won first prize at the local show with her swan eggs sponge. But that was quite a common thing. Everybody knew. You just used one egg instead of 4.
Every weekend, my parents went out every weekend to one of the lakes, and we grew up going out to Albuquerque and going swimming, and they'd have water skiing and whatever. Yeah, they used to have a ski carnivals. Would have been the Southern Valley Ski Club. Yeah, it was called. That's right, yeah. Well, they probably had one once a year, sort of, didn't they? Really?
And boat racing, didn't they? And slalom.
See, they got suits on, so it has to be back in the 50s, because no one would wear a suit out the lake now. In my lifetime.
If I wore clothes.
59 it filled the year I was born, so I would have been 3 or 4. We used to go down to the lake and dig for yabbies overnight and fill, a bucket up with yabbies and take them home and have them for tea with my grandfather. So
the creek filled and we had yabbies by the thousands, didn't we? They just throw in a
scoop them out,
just a big.
Just in the creek.
Thousands of yabbies, and people came from everywhere.
Yeah.
And I have friends from South Australia and whatever who came. Like people heard about the yabbies at Albuquerque and they used to come to get yabbies.
One time, people used to go out when the lake was going to fill, the water was coming down, they'd go out with their eskies and sit on the bridge and wait for the water, and while they had all the wine flowers and all this sort of thing, they'd have a ball. But Millie, she told me that one time they went out there and sat and the water's coming down and the yabbies came out and walked up the river, up the creek to meet the water. Yeah. Could you believe that?
And you'd find
and I mean, there's none there, but they must have come up out of the mud or the. Because they live for yonks underneath.
Underneath the ground, yeah.
Even though the lake's dry.
And it was always all your friends. It wasn't just you. There was probably 15 kids. Poor old Daddy used to spend all his time in the boat. He'd get burnt to the frazzle because he'd be pulling the ski. Because he'd get so burnt and he was going bald, we bought him a purple toweling hat because we've got a jet boat, purple jet boat. And I can remember he being Dad, if you knew Dad, and he's doing a wheelie in the water because they just spin on a top hat. His bloody purple hat went to the bottom of Lake Albuquerque, and he was dark on. He still did, he just hated it. His purple hat went to the bottom of the lake. But we'd spent hours out there as kids.
Redfin, the best you can get.
Oh, beautiful redfin.
Beautiful redfin. We camped out there for 6 weeks and I reckon we had fish on the barbie for breakfast and every morning, fresh fish. Beautiful fresh fish.
Yeah, and just the bird life, full stop. Yeah. It's just, every type of bird you can think of. Mate, there was a lot of people down there that actually would park their caravans and they stayed there the whole time. And over a weekend they'd come out. Friday nights they'd come out and they stayed all Sunday and go back. And it was just a hive of activity.
St Mary's was the best place over there because it was always good clean water and no logs or stumps or anything in it. The year of the drought, there's been plenty of droughts, but 1981 was a wet year and St Mary's filled up, and in 1982 we didn't have much harvest or anything, so we had plenty of time to go water skiing and it was full. So it's real good. And being close to home, you couldn't get any better. I can remember there during the drought there was 13 boats, 13 speed boats on there altogether, which is not a very big lake, but there was enough room for us all, which was good. Yeah, we had a paraflight, which you hooked on the back of the boat or you could put it behind a vehicle or whatever, but we bought it when the water was full in the lake and you'd had a rope on it and we'd get about 200 feet off the water was the highest we ever got, which we kept adding rope until we got higher and higher. Did come unhooked one day and the guy in it went out over the top of the red gum trees and up on top of the hill. He landed in the crop, but when we went and found him and he was all right, so it was too windy, that was part of the trouble. It said in the brochure that nobody had been killed or seriously injured, so that was a good selling point. And we just hooked longer ropes on the thing to get higher off the ground. That was the knot came undone that I quite proudly admit I did it up. But anyway, that was all right. So we used to tow that around there, it was good, it was great fun. Used to have fish in there as well, there used to be redfin in there, there's guys fishing and yabbing. Yeah, and be anything up to 40 people would get down there at night time. We'd have a barbecue some Saturday nights down there on the water after we'd been, or on the bank, after we'd been water skiing. So it was a sort of community gathering always came down there, which was ideal.
We would take the children swimming down the lake because we didn't have a pool, and then when they got better swimmers they would swim out to the pontoon. Then they could hop on the pontoon and have a rest and then swim back. And I remember that I took them up to Horsham for testing because the lake was quite brownish and you couldn't see them so well, and once they disappeared it was hard to tell their stroke technique. So when I was going to test them I took them to the Horsham pool, and there was one young boy called Sean McCarthy, I remember, didn't want to get into the pool because he saw these black things on the bottom of the pool and he thought that they were steel girders and he would stub his toe, when in fact they were simply the black painted lines on the bottom of the pool. But because he'd only ever swam in the lake, he didn't realise that he was quite safe in the pool, so it took a bit of encouragement to get him into the pool, and he'd never been to a pool, so that was good for them. Over the years I've done lots of activities as the lake started to recede. I've done activities where we've cleaned up the lake, so we've picked up thousands and thousands of bottles. And but one rather funny incident was that there was the local mechanic, he very keen on Shell sunglasses and things like that, and he said he was out in the boat and in his speedboat and he'd lost these sunglasses overboard. So just as a joke, when we were cleaning up the thing, he said, you know, he'd give one of the kids $5 if they could find the sunglasses he'd lost a few years ago. And lo and behold, the kids were walking around, found the sunglasses, Shell on them, so they went and claimed their $5 from Darren Paul because they'd actually found the sunglasses that he'd lost years ago.
Yeah, Dad and I do lots of fun things together, and Dad and Pa did too. And they went out swimming in swamps and stuff when they were full. Or like having swims and going fishing with Dad and stuff like that. I find that lots of fun. And going out in boats and stuff like that with Dad. Yeah, you hear the frogs because we got a swamp across the road from our house, and you hear the frogs croaking, stuff like that. Yeah, sometimes you can't get to sleep with them, you just listen to them. Once there's no water and you don't hear them every night, yeah, you do miss them. Some, like the brolgas, when they come, they're pretty and they do funny dances when it gets dark. And they make funny sounds and all sorts of funny things.
In the dry period, I can still vividly remember, when we used to go in the springtime, we'd be on the lookout for native companions, you know, the brolgas. Oh, and it was a treat to see these brolgas dancing, you know, perhaps 4 or 6 of them, because they're usually in pairs, and that was just on the flat there, that side of the Mullinger there.
Our kids' generation has absolutely no concept of what it'd be like to live through a sequence of wet winters, do they? The thought of not being able to actually drive anything around the paddocks is something that they really can't envisage, you know, whereas we were sort of used to being semi-marooned in winter. You know? People just forget really quickly, I think. I don't think they appreciate wetlands any less. People love the lakes and things around. I mean, the Mullinger and Bring Albert and Charlegrach and Clark's Lake and places like that are very much embedded in the social pattern of people's lives.
So the start of that story was 44 probably.
Yeah, that was 44.
And in 46, and the lake was at its lowest in 44, and in 46 it overflowed. Yeah. So, you know, you don't panic, I don't think, straight away. It could happen the same again, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's a good cycle.
Some people say maybe it won't come back, but I believe that these things go in cycles, and I believe that it will come back. It's just a matter of time, and it's taken a long time to empty out, and so it will take some time to fill up again, but I believe, or certainly hope, that that will be the case in the future. So I think it's still important for children to learn how valuable these are as our assets, and the things that we can do with them, and the things that have been done in the past, and I'm sure they'll think of new things to do when the water comes back.